Hey guys! Tonight, we're heading to the cold, wet edge of the Pacific Northwest to a quiet corner of Salem, Oregon, where the silence of one November night never fully lifted. It's 2007. You're standing in front of a two-story craftsman house. The porch light is still on. There's a soft yellow glow bleeding from the kitchen window. A dog is barking behind the door hoarse now, like it's been doing that for hours. Inside, the air smells faintly of lavender and old books. There's a mug of tea gone cold on the counter, a cardigan draped over the couch, and a single lamp left on beside a stack of graded essays. But there's no Madison Cole. Her car is still in the garage. Her phone is charging beside her bed. There's a pair of flannel pajamas neatly folded on the floor like she was planning to change into them after something. Just something quick. Maybe a walk with the dog. Maybe a visit from someone she trusted. But her wallet's gone. So are her keys. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time down below. I love seeing how far this story drifts. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step carefully across the living room rug. Madison's house isn't messy. It isn't lived in either. It's curated like someone who learned early on to stay in control of her space because the world outside rarely cooperated. You notice the dog Benny, a golden retriever, lying by the door now, his tail barely thumping. There's something unnerving about the way he watches the hallway. You follow his gaze. No sign of struggle. Not in the bedroom. Not in the bathroom. The towel is still damp on the rack. The lipstick she wore to school that day sits uncapped on the vanity. And then, you remember the glove? It's not in the house. It was found out on the lawn. Half hidden beneath a leaf, just one standard issue latex glove, not ripped, not buried, left behind like punctuation, like a period at the end of a sentence someone hoped no one would read. Inside the glove, Madison's DNA and a second unidentified male profile that, for over a decade, would go unmatched in every national system. That glove would haunt investigators, Reddit forums, and late-night true crime threads for years. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. The world outside kept spinning. Thanksgiving came and went. The school held a candlelight vigil. Benny was sent to live with Madison's sister, and the news cycle moved on. At first, the cops weren't sure what they were dealing with. Voluntary disappearance, a breakdown. There was no blood, no forced entry. The door had been locked behind her. But who locks a door behind themselves when they don't come back? One detective noted something odd. The porch light had been unscrewed just enough that it wouldn't flick on. That little detail gets ignored in most reports, but it stayed with him. Because that kind of thing, that's preparation. Now, here's where we zoom out. Salem, Oregon. A city built on timber and agriculture sits quietly between Portland and Eugene. Not too big, not too small. A place where you still wave at your mail carrier and get suspicious if someone parks too long in front of your house. Salem's history is steeped in contradiction. It was a major hub for the Oregon Trail, once briefly nicknamed Kemeketa, a Kalapuyo word meaning gathering place. But historians still argue whether the land's original name was properly preserved or just sanitized by settlers. That tension between what's remembered and what's rewritten clings to this story like fog on pine bark. See, Madison Cole wasn't supposed to disappear. Not in Salem, not in a town where every third person knows your dentist and your ex-boyfriend's dog's name, but disappear she did on a cold November night, just after 10, and no one saw a thing. Some say it was raining that night. Others say it was clear. The one camera on this block, a doorbell cam 2 houses down malfunctioned. You can't make this stuff up. As for Madison, her last known text message was to her sister, confirming dinner plans the following weekend. It read, "Can't wait to catch up? You owe me wine and gossip." That message, cheerful? Casual. Warm, was sent at 9:38 p.m. By 10:15, she was gone. The neighborhood search began by dawn. Flyers went up at grocery stores, high schools, coffee shops. Have you seen Madison Cole? With a smiling photo of her in a red scarf, surrounded by students, on a field trip to Fort Vancouver. Fun fact, that fort was once a British trading post, and yes, beaver pelts were a currency, weirdly efficient. but no one came forward. One jogger swore she saw a man in a dark hoodie standing in the middle of the street that night. No details, no license plate. And besides, as she put it, it didn't feel dangerous. Just off. That's the thing about stories like this. They always feel off in retrospect. So now, you're left with a question that smells like old pine needles and evaporated rain. How do you vanish from your own house without leaving a single scream behind? And what kind of person walks into a home like this, pauses long enough to let the dog calm down, and still decides to leave with something as invisible as silence? We'll get closer. Just keep your shoes on. You step outside, the porch creaks beneath your weight, just a soft groan, like the house remembering something it doesn't want to say. The air is sharp tonight, the kind that stings your nostrils and wakes up old injuries. Madison's lawn stretches ahead, modest and tidy, the hedges trimmed, with the kind of care only someone with too much alone time and a love of routine would bother to maintain. And then you see it, nestled between two damp leaves, just inches from the walkway. A latex glove, pale, crinkled, slightly twisted like someone pulled it off in a rush. It's so out of place that your brain doesn't register it at first, like it shouldn't exist in the same scene as this quiet suburban yard. A neighbor finds it a few days after Madison's disappearance, thinks maybe it's from the trash, drops it into a Ziploc bag, just in case. Turns out, it's the only thing anyone ever finds. Inside, Madison's DNA, a touch of sweat, skin cells, and more chillingly, a second profile, male, unidentified, not a boyfriend, not a family member, not in CODIS, not in any local database. This glove becomes the entire case. Evidence lockers can be weird places. They smell like cardboard and rubber bands and the dried-up urgency of cases long since cooled. But this glove, it stays near the front, gets checked out over and over again. Passed between techs, analysts, even psychics. People whisper about it like it's cursed. Or lucky, depending on how badly you need a career win. The strange thing is, whoever wore it knew what they were doing. No fingerprints, no tears in the glove, no other prints on the doorknob, the mug, or the keys. Just one item left, like a calling card from someone who never wanted to be known but needed to say something. Let's zoom out for a minute. Did you know that latex gloves didn't become common in forensic investigations until the 1980s? Before that, most investigators handled crime scenes like they were rearranging a living room. Seriously, historians still argue whether early crime labs did more harm than good, just by contaminating evidence with pipe smoke and sandwich grease. Anyway, this glove, it's from a basic multi-pack. No brand traceable, no palm creases to match, but DNA. DNA doesn't lie, it just waits. Years, if necessary. The fact that it contained Madison's own skin cells might suggest she fought back. Or maybe it touched her as it helped her out the door. Or worse, after. You wonder what she saw. Because here's the thing, latex gloves are used to clean, to protect, to heal, but they're also used by people who plan, people who think ahead, who know what leaves traces, who know how not to get caught. You walk the edge of her lawn now, look up and down the street. It's just empty. But this is the kind of quiet that feels pressed down like a lid screwed on too tight. You start to wonder if the neighbors really didn't see anything or just told themselves that. There's a difference. One neighbor, Mr. Carson, says he heard a noise around 10 p.m., a thump or maybe a whimper. But his wife says it was probably their cat knocking over the laundry basket. They didn't go look. They were watching reruns. You know the kind, those sitcoms where nobody ever locks their door and the worst thing that happens is a burnt casserole. Funny how people forget what real fear sounds like. Meanwhile, the glove gets tested every few years as technology improves. Touch DNA, mitochondrial sequencing, even isotope mapping. Nothing sticks. Then there's the theory that it was planted, that the glove wasn't worn by the person who harmed her at all, but by someone who wanted to frame another, or create misdirection, which, you have to admit, is just the right amount of unsettling. Now, here's your fringe fact for the night. Did you know that some serial offenders collect latex gloves from hospitals just so they never trace back to one store or source? It's rare, but it's real. One 1993 case in Pennsylvania involved a janitor who stole hundreds from a clinic supply room and used them during home invasions. Because evil can be economical. But back to the lawn. You crouch near where the glove was found. Picture it there, crumpled, damp, Silent. How long did it sit before someone noticed? How many people passed it by thinking it was just trash? That's the part that gets to you, isn't it? The fact that a clue can be screaming and still sound like nothing. That maybe someone saw the man who wore it and didn't think twice. Maybe he waved. Maybe he smiled. Maybe he even said good evening. The dogs in this neighborhood bark at everything mailmen, squirrels, Amazon drivers, but no one recalls a bark that night. Except Benny, and Benny hasn't barked since. So what do you do with a single glove and no body? You dig deeper. You make posters. You walk the neighborhood with a flashlight and a broken heart. You hope for rain to reveal footprints, but all you get is the aching sound of nothing. And the longer it goes on, the more the glove starts to feel like a joke, a riddle without a punchline. Something left behind just to remind you that you're always one decision away from being a headline. The kind of detail that seems too dramatic for real life until it's real, until the glove's DNA finally matches someone. But not yet. We're not there yet. You close the gate behind you. It doesn't latch fully anymore, just nudges into place like it's tired, like it's seen too much and would rather not hold anything in or keep anything out. The neighborhood looks the same in every direction. Identical roofs, wind chimes dangling like gossip, porch swings that haven't moved since Labor Day. You could almost believe this was a safe place. You could almost believe she was still inside. Almost. But to understand Madison Cole, you have to go back. Back before the glove, before the dog, before she became a woman missing from her own front step. She was the kind of girl they wrote yearbook quotes about. Smiling, polished, poised. To know her was to adore her, and people did. Adore her. A beauty queen. Sure, but not just the kind who smiled for the crown. She had sharp opinions, a nervous laugh, an eerie calm under pressure. Her old pageant coach once said she could outtalk a senator in heels and make him say thank you after. Born and raised in Salem, she went to Willamette University, just a few miles from the high school where she later taught. She majored in history, minored in theater, and could recite entire paragraphs about the Spanish-American War without glancing at her notes. Her students remembered that. What they didn't remember, or maybe never knew, was that Madison never left Oregon, even when she had the chance. One scholarship offer from NYU, another from Northwestern. She turned them both down. She said, "Why run from something just because it's familiar?" But her sister later admitted, in an interview, that it had more to do with their father's stroke and how Madison didn't want their mother to carry it all alone. That's the kind of person she was. She stayed. That decision made her a legend at Eastwood High. Not for her looks or her past as Miss Marion County, but for how she taught, for how she remembered names, for how she noticed when someone had been crying and asked if they needed 5 minutes before taking the quiz. You probably had a teacher like that, one you didn't appreciate until long after the last bell. The one who told you history isn't dates and battles. It's people making bad decisions over and over again, dressed in different clothes. Madison loved ancient Rome. She even wore a laurel pin on test days, as if summoning strength from the gods of trivia. She'd lecture with one hand in her pocket and the other gesturing like a conductor. Students said her voice was calm but firm, like a librarian with a sword. Historians still argue whether Roman senators wore white because it symbolized purity or just because it was expensive and hard to keep clean. Madison taught both theories, said the truth usually lives somewhere between a dry cleaning bill and a public lie. She had a way of getting under people's skin in a good way. You'd leave her classroom wondering if Julius Caesar was really a tragic hero or just really bad at choosing friends. Still, there were whispers, always are. Some parents didn't like that she was single, that she had no kids, that she wore dark lipstick and listened to jazz instead of top 40, that she once assigned 1984 and refused to let anyone skip the Room 101 scene. And some students, they weren't ready for someone who saw through them. You know the type, the ones who joke too much or go quiet when you make eye contact. Some of them got pulled back from the edge because she noticed. Others, not so much. She never reported one particular student. Not when he wrote, "Your smile makes me sick," and Sharpie across his desk. Not when he waited outside her car and said he didn't mean anything by it. She just told the school counselor and kept teaching. No official complaints, no paperwork. But the name, you'll hear it soon enough. She stayed because she believed in the town, in the students, in the idea that doing something well, even in the same place forever, was enough. And maybe it was, until someone decided it wasn't. Now, here's your quirky tidbit for the night. In ancient Babylon, teachers were often paid in grain, beer, or goat meat, depending on how well their students performed. Imagine getting a sack of barley for surviving finals week. Madison, she got apples, handwritten thank yous, and once, a mug that read, "History is a nightmare I'm trying to wake you from." She laughed and kept it on her desk until the end. And here's the part that always breaks you a little. In her last few months, Madison had started writing a book, a memoir, half history, half personal reflection. She called it the quiet kind. Her sister found pieces of it on a flash drive after her disappearance. In one passage, Madison wrote, "There's something beautiful about standing still while everyone else runs. You get to see the patterns no one else does." You wonder what patterns she saw. Did she notice someone following her? Did she recognize the car parked down the street too often? Did she feel the air change, even slightly, before the silence closed in? Or was she just too kind to believe that someone would ever cross the line? Whatever the answer, you know this much: she stayed, and that made her visible. Sometimes, visibility is the most dangerous thing of all. You linger by the front door. It's quiet again, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that makes your ears strain for a sound that isn't coming. A drip, a shuffle, anything. But all you hear is the hum of distant traffic, a wind chime somewhere on the next street over, and the low, staccato breathing of the dog who's been waiting too long, Benny. He's old now, grayer, slower, but in 2007, Benny was young, strong, the kind of golden retriever that bounded toward visitors and sat politely for a treat, the kind that followed Madison from room to room like a second shadow. And on the night she vanished, he didn't bark right away. That's the part people forget. The police reports mention him. The neighbors remember hearing him later after midnight, but not during, which tells you something. Because dogs don't lie. They don't get caught up in alibis or rationalizations. They don't gaslight themselves into doubt. If a stranger had broken in with force or malice, Benny would have let the whole block know. But what if it wasn't a stranger? You picture it. Someone walks up the path, doesn't ring the bell. Madison opens the door anyway. She knows him. Maybe she taught him. Maybe she once stayed after class to talk him down from something stupid. Maybe he smiled just enough. And Benny, he knows the rhythm of that moment. The tone of her voice, the way her shoulders ease slightly when she trusts someone, so he doesn't bark. He just watches, follows, maybe even wags his tail, until something changes, something shifts, a new tone, a sharp breath, a door that closes too quietly, and then silence. That's when Benny starts to bark. He barks until his throat is raw, until his nails scratch at the floor, until the neighbor next door finally hears it and assumes Madison just left the TV on. Because people always assume the simplest answer until it's too late. Benmy was found the next morning by a concerned colleague who came to check in after Madison missed first period. The dog was frantic, pacing, dehydrated, but the house was still locked. No signs of forced entry, no blood, no overturned furniture. Just a dog trying to explain what no one could understand. That colleague was Mr. Altman, science teacher, Vietnam vet, and quiet drinker of black coffee. He'd known Madison for 6 years, called her kiddo even though she outranked him in every staff meeting. Said the moment he saw Benny, he knew something was wrong. I don't care how quiet someone is. He told police they don't just stop answering their phone. Not Madison. She was dependable in a way that made you feel lazy. You can still visit his classroom. He retired in 2012, but his name's on the alumni board. Underneath it, someone once graffitied in pencil. He was the last grown-up in the building. That week, Benny refused food, slept by the door. Every few hours, he'd get up and pace the perimeter of the house, sniffing at the corners, whining softly, like he could still sense her just out of reach. Dogs remember things differently than we do. Not by date, not by logic, but by scent, by tone, by shifts in energy. And Benny, who once waited patiently for her to return from every grocery run, never recovered from this one. Now, here's your historical fact of the night. During the Middle Ages, dogs were used in criminal trials across Europe. Some were even brought before magistrates to testify by reacting to suspects. Historians still argue whether these were legal performances or sincere attempts at justice. Makes you wonder what Benny would have done in that courtroom. who he would have growled at. There's a theory that Madison's attacker fed Benny a treat laced with sedative, but no traces were ever found in his system. No signs of tampering in his food. Just trauma, the kind that lingers in the body even after the event passes. And if you've ever seen a dog shake in its sleep, you know what I mean. You walk now to the side yard where the bushes grow dense and the fence leans just slightly inward. It was here, behind the shrubs, that one of Benny's toys was found days later, buried in a rush. Not by Madison. She always placed them in the basket by the door. No one can prove it was dragged there in the scuffle, but the timing was strange, and the way it was jammed beneath the dirt like someone didn't want it seen felt off. You can still see the patch of earth that doesn't quite match. Here's your quirky tidbit for this section. In Japan, there's a shrine dedicated entirely to loyal dogs. One statue there is rubbed daily by visitors who believe dogs can guide lost souls home. The stone is nearly worn smooth from decades of gentle hands. You imagine Benny standing there, tail still, eyes locked on the door, and you start to feel it, not fear, exactly, not yet, but unease, because you know what comes next. A missing person report, a search team, a bloodhound brought in that follows Madison's scent to the end of the block and then stops. Just ends. No direction, no indication she got in a car, no footprints on the soft soil, just nothing. That nothingness clings to the case like static. And Benny, he never barked like that again. Not at visitors, not at squirrels, not even when the mailman left a package with a loud thump. Some things break and stay that way. You take a walk through the neighborhood. It's a perfect little loop: Maplewood Lane, Ivy Court, Sycamore Place. All the names designed to sound soft, nostalgic, non-threatening. Streets curve just enough to give the illusion of privacy, but not so much that you'd ever get lost. It's the kind of suburb built on the assumption that nothing truly bad can happen here. But tonight, every porch light feels like an accusation, every swing set left out in the yard like a forgotten prayer. You start to notice things that don't match the brochure. A broken gutter, a security sign from the company that doesn't exist anymore, a yard gnome with its head cracked clean off. You pass by 3 houses in particular, the ones closest to Madison's. All 3 had windows facing her front yard. None of them reported seeing anything. And when interviewed later, all 3 neighbors gave almost the same quote. "We just didn't think something like that could happen here." There it is again, that phrase. The lie people tell themselves when they don't want to look too closely. When the illusion of safety matters more than its reality. But you know better now. This neighborhood has a history, whether it wants one or not. Let's go back, just for a minute, Salem, Oregon, before the cul-de-sacs and community gardens. Back when this part of town was little more than patchy farmland and overgrown forest. Did you know that during the Civil War, troops trained just a few miles from where Madison's house now sits? Camp Baker, established in 1862, never saw a battle, but it was built to suppress Confederate sympathizers in the area. Historians still argue whether it was necessary or just a paranoid political gesture. It's all been flattened now, of course, turned into subdivisions with names like Whisper Creek and Birch Point. But the ground remembers, and maybe Madison did too. She used to joke with her students that every place in America is haunted. It just depends who you ask. That quote is painted in faded cursive on the whiteboard still hanging in her classroom. You slow down as you reach the old lamppost on the corner, the same one Madison reportedly passed each night when walking Benny after dinner. It flickers now, even though it was replaced just 2 years ago. The city says it's a wiring issue. The locals call it Madison's Light. Some kids dare each other to stand under it at midnight and say her name 3 times. Urban legend. Sure, but don't say it. Not yet. Here's something weird you won't find in the official report. A postal worker later came forward and admitted to seeing someone loitering near the lamppost the morning after Madison disappeared. A man in dark clothes, hoodie pulled tight. He wasn't doing anything illegal, just waiting. As if for someone who never showed, he disappeared before anyone could ask questions. You wonder if that was guilt or just fear of being involved. Either way, it fits a pattern. Because the more you walk this neighborhood, the more you realize that nothing actually happens here. And that's the problem. It makes everyone lazy. At the time of Madison's disappearance, only 3 houses on the block had security systems. None of them had outdoor cameras. Motion lights, rare. It wasn't that kind of place. Until it was. After Madison vanished, every house installed floodlights, doorbell cams, window bars. The local Home Depot couldn't keep locks in stock for weeks. But it was all too late. You can't install security retroactively. You can't bolt a door that's already been opened. Let's talk about the Joneses for a moment, neighbors directly across the street. Lovely family. 2 kids, soccer parents. They hosted the block's 4th of July barbecue every year. But they also had a clear view of Madison's house, and they didn't hear a thing. When asked about that night, Mr. Jones said, "We were watching a nature documentary. My wife fell asleep early. I thought she let the dog out. Turns out she didn't. The dog peed on the rug." He laughed, awkward, defensive, and the room went quiet. Because deep down, everyone was thinking the same thing. If someone had just looked out their window, if someone had just followed their instinct, if someone had just asked. But no one did. That's what makes this kind of disappearance worse than most. Not just the lack of evidence, but the echo of missed chances. The soft, gnawing suspicion that somebody, anybody, could have stopped it, but they didn't. Because they didn't want to get involved. Because they assumed someone else would. You look back now at Madison's porch, still empty, still quiet, like a stage waiting for a character who'll never return. And here's your quirky tidbit of the night. In the 1950s, American suburbs were designed with curved roads and cul-de-sacs, not just for traffic safety, but to discourage through traffic from strangers. It was supposed to be safer, but critics now say it also made it easier for crimes to go unseen. Fewer exits, fewer eyes. You think about that as you complete your loop. You've seen the whole neighborhood now. The houses that turned away, the windows that stayed shut, the streets that remembered nothing, and it hits you. This isn't just the scene of a crime. It's a stage for a performance no one wanted to watch. And yet, every actor showed up, every single one. They just looked away. You rewind the clock. Just one day, that's all it takes to find the thread. Madison Cole's last known day wasn't dramatic, or strange, or particularly eventful. And maybe that's what makes it so chilling. There was no thunderclap, no final warning. Just a perfectly ordinary day, where every choice she made nudged her one breath closer to disappearing. You start with morning. She was up by 6:45 a.m. Her neighbor, Miss Trump, saw her step onto the porch in a robe and slippers to grab the newspaper. Madison waved, offered a sleepy smile, and said, "Looks like another test day." It was Thursday, history quiz day. She dressed in her usual classroom armor. Dark jeans, black boots, a burnt orange turtleneck, and that vintage brown coat with corduroy elbow patches she thrifted years ago. A practical outfit, but stylish. She had that way of looking sharp without trying. Before leaving, she fed Benny, grabbed her thermos of coffee, and tossed a bag of pretzels into her tote. Then she was out the door by 7:30 a.m., locking it behind her with that deliberate click. Security cameras from the local middle school down the road catch her car passing just before 7:45. The weather that day was cold and dry, rare for Salem in November. A perfect morning to vanish into. You follow her to Eastwood High. She arrives a few minutes before the first bell. A sophomore sees her dancing slightly in the parking lot, trying to warm up. She laughs, says, "This is what retirement looks like," and heads inside. Her school day is normal. Attendance, warm-ups, group review, quiz, a brief lecture on the lead-up to World War I she'd given a dozen times before. She still used overhead transparencies. Thought PowerPoint dulled the mind. She joked about Franz Ferdinand not being a band, but a mistake on wheels. Her students groaned on cue. But here's the thing, one student wasn't laughing. Logan Price. You've seen that name before. Buried deep in an old disciplinary file, sophomore, repeated junior year, transferred out before graduation. No one remembered much about him until later. That Thursday, Logan sat in the back row, hood up, silent. When asked to hand in his quiz, he stared at her for 5 full seconds before passing it forward. No grade, just an empty paper with a smiley face drawn in the corner. Madison didn't say anything, but another student, Leah Cortez, later told police that Madison looked rattled, not scared, just thrown off, like something had cracked beneath her calm. Still, the day went on. At 3:10 p.m., she locked her classroom, said goodbye to the janitor, and walked to her car. Security footage. Again, there's Madison with her tote bag over one shoulder, her coffee thermos in hand, squinting into the sun. She stopped at the grocery store on 12th, bought kale, almond milk, 3 sweet potatoes, and a bottle of wine. Her usual Thursday haul. A clerk remembered her because she always asked for paper bags, said they stood up better in the trunk. At 4:12 p.m., she filled up at the gas station near her house. That's the last time we know for sure that someone saw her alive. And something odd happened there. The clerk, Ray, swears she looked tense, like she was waiting for someone. She paced a little after pumping gas, didn't get back in the car right away, just stood near the hood, arms folded. Then she looked over her shoulder and froze. Ray says she smiled after that, but it was the kind of smile you give a boss you hate, too tight, too quick. Then she got in her car and drove off. Historians still argue whether smiles evolved to display non-aggression or just to cover fear. You see both theories play out in that gas station moment. You wonder who she saw. You wonder if it was someone she once taught. She made it home by 4:30. Her neighbor saw her unloading groceries, pausing to scratch Benny behind the ears. She waved again. That was the last known sighting. After that, silence. Her phone logs show a text at 5:17 to her sister about dinner plans, wine, gossip. A second message came in at 7:43 from a coworker reminding her about a staff meeting. She never responded. That message was marked red, though, meaning she was still home, still alive. Her coat was found on the hook by the door, her boots near the mat, so she took them off, got comfortable, which means whatever happened next, it happened fast. Here's your quirky tidbit of the night. In ancient Greece, women would often remove their sandals at the threshold of a home and hang them upside down to ward off bad luck. Madison kept hers neatly upright, always. You wonder what she believed in. And if she thought it would be enough, let's rewind one last time to a forgotten detail in the kitchen. The kettle, it had been turned on, but never poured. Water still inside, slightly warm, meaning she was preparing tea, maybe chamomile. Her favorite when someone knocked, and she answered, and she didn't put her shoes back on. You think about that small act, the trust in it, the hope that whatever was about to happen would be brief, that she'd be back in time to enjoy her tea before bed. But some knocks don't bring guests, they bring ghosts. You stand in the doorway again. This time, your eyes land on the small bowl beside the keys. A ceramic dish Madison bought at a summer craft fair. Inside, her earrings from the day before, 2 quarters, a lone house key, but not the one for the front door. That's the first clue. Madison always carried a small key ring, car key, house key, mailbox key, and a tiny bottle opener shaped like a fish. It was missing. The police noted it in their first walkthrough. Her spare key was still on the hook, but the one she used every day, gone. Same with her wallet. Not the kind of thing you leave behind if you're abducted, but not exactly what you take if you're planning to disappear either. The wallet was black leather, compact, organized. No cards had been used since, no withdrawals, no trace. And yet, there's something else, a detail you can't shake. The bedroom lights were off, the kitchen light was still on, her phone was plugged in beside the bed, but the charger cord had been slightly yanked, like someone tugged it quickly, as if there was a moment, just a moment, when she tried to grab it and didn't get the chance. So what do you make of that? Here's where it starts to bend. The clean lines of the case, the locked house, the calm dog, the missing woman begin to unravel at the edges, because too much was left behind, and too little was truly disturbed. It doesn't feel like a struggle, it feels arranged. Like someone knew what panic looked like and how to avoid it. And then there's the back door, unlocked. The front was latched, the garage secure, windows locked from the inside. But the sliding back door, it was left open just an inch. Not enough for wind, just enough for quiet. You walk to the backyard now. It's small but well kept. Garden beds, mostly herbs, lavender, rosemary. A faint smell of mint clings to the air. There's a chair tipped over by the fence. No reason for it, just tipped. You remember the glove found in the front yard, but maybe not dropped there first. Maybe it was carried, maybe it was tossed. The idea of someone walking through her home, through this home with that glove on, invisible in the darkness, is enough to make your chest tighten. It's methodical, but personal. You scan the rooms again. Nothing taken. No electronics missing. No jewelry. not even the wine she bought that afternoon. So what kind of robbery leaves the valuables? What kind of disappearance leaves the furniture unbothered? The dog confused, and the door cracked just enough to whisper, "She's not here anymore." But someone was. Now, here's your historical fact. In ancient Rome, burglars were known to place amulets or cursed tablets near a victim's door to prevent divine retribution. It was part superstition, part ego. Modern burglars, they leave lateas, text gloves. The missing wallet and keys scream narrative. They're meant to say, she left on her own. Maybe she ran. Maybe she snapped. That's what people whispered, right? She seemed so composed. She was always so calm. Maybe she couldn't take it anymore. But Madison left her dog, her unfinished tea, her phone, her book on the nightstand turned face down mid-chapter. People don't abandon the mundane unless they're forced to. And that's where the theory came in the missing wallet trick. A tactic so old it barely makes the headlines anymore. Stage a disappearance by removing just enough to create ambiguity. No blood, no broken glass. Then surely, she chose this. You know better. And so did one detective, Harvey Malloy, a quiet man, ex-army, raised in Nevada. With a habit of rubbing the bridge of his nose when he was frustrated, he didn't say much during the early briefings. But he wrote something down in his notebook on day one and circled it twice. This isn't messy enough. At the time, everyone dismissed him, thought it was just a hunch. But what he meant was, this scene had restraint. It had forethought, and that made it scarier. Because no one kills out of panic and leaves the house cleaner than before. You find yourself staring at the edge of the kitchen counter, where a single water ring stains the wood. It's the only imperfection in an otherwise meticulous space. You imagine Madison setting down her mug there every night, always in the same spot. That mark is still there. Now, here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. In 1930s France, detectives used a method called dust reading, where they'd study the patterns of settled dust to determine movement in a room. It was wildly imprecise, but sometimes shockingly accurate. Dust doesn't lie. It remembers who walked where and how recently. This house, too still, too perfect. And the more you stare, the more you realize the real evidence isn't what's gone. It's what's been carefully left in place. A folded pair of pajamas, a drawer slightly open, a wine glass washed and placed upside down in the rack still drying. It's choreography. Someone knew what a search party would look for. Someone knew which objects would speak, and they made sure those objects said nothing useful, except they did leave one message: the missing wallet and keys. Not stolen, not lost, just enough to shift the focus, just enough to buy time. Just enough to build a lie, and for over a decade, it worked. Until someone slipped. But that's later. For now, you stand at the threshold of a home that staged its own denial, and wonder, who knew her well enough to make the truth look like choice? You flip through old files now, digital archives, photocopied notes, statements from administrators too polite to say what they really meant. You're looking for someone who lingered in the margins, someone who was there then suddenly wasn't, and eventually, you find him. Logan Price. He was 17 when Madison disappeared. Never officially listed as a suspect, barely mentioned. In fact, but once you know the name, you start to see it. In the background of yearbook photos, on 2 separate detention slips, and in one incident report written in pen, not typed, as if someone hoped it wouldn't be entered into the official system. You read it carefully. Student confronted teacher after class. Tone was sarcastic, then escalated to hostile. Teacher diffused situation. Student removed from a class roster next day. That's it. No follow-up, no interview, no contact made with guardians. But it was Madison's signature at the bottom. Neat, firm, underlined once. You wonder why she didn't push for more. Maybe she thought she could handle it. Maybe she didn't want to escalate things for a kid who clearly needed help. Or maybe she was already afraid. And here's where it starts to pull tight. Logan was a transfer from Hillsborough. Previous behavioral notes included disruptive conduct, unprovoked aggression, and one flagged incident involving a substitute teacher whom he followed to her car, saying he just wanted to talk. No criminal charges, just school shuffles. Every district has them. The students who slip through cracks wide enough to fit a body. Logan was smart, quiet, The kind of student who turned in just enough work to stay under the radar. The kind who'd read 1984 and then write, maybe Big Brother had a point. Creepy, but not enough to raise flags. Until you add in the final straw. He dropped out in April 2007, just months before Madison vanished. And no one checked in. No social worker, no counselor, not even a truancy officer. He just disappeared. That's the thing about troubled students. Once they leave, everyone breathes a little easier and moves on. It is not cruelty, it's fatigue. But sometimes, moving on means leaving a door open behind you. Madison never talked about Logan again. Not to staff, not to family, not even to her sister, who knew almost everything. But you think about the gas station moment, that frozen smile, that flinch, and you wonder, did she see Logan that day? There's no footage of him, no photos, no witnesses. But one thing stands out. Remember the gas station clerk, Ray? In a later interview, he described the person Madison seemed to look at. White guy, hoodie up, tall, just standing there. Didn't buy anything, just watched her like he was waiting for a bus that never came. Ray thought it was nothing. But he also admitted something strange. He'd seen the same guy 2 weeks earlier, loitering near the back fence of the high school. When asked why he didn't mention it before, he said, "I figured it wasn't my business. He wasn't hurting anybody. You know what that is. That's the town looking away." Now, here's your historical fact of the night. In 1844, a Massachusetts school teacher named Elizabeth Peabody opened the first English-language kindergarten in the U.S., insisting early education could prevent behavioral issues later in life. Historians still debate whether her methods were effective or just idealistic. Madison would have known that. She believed in early intervention. She believed in redemption. She probably believed she could reach Logan, that he was just angry, that it would pass, but it didn't. Because what happens when the teacher you hate is also the only person who ever saw through you? What happens when the one person who held you accountable suddenly has no power over you? Logan left a notebook in his locker when he dropped out. No one read it at the time, but it resurfaced years later when the locker was reassigned. Most of it was nonsense, song lyrics, doodles. The word mask written 17 times on one page, but tucked in the back was this: "It's not about getting even. It's about being remembered." Creepy, right? But also vague. Vague enough to ignore, which is exactly what everyone did. Now for your quirky tidbit. In medieval England, students were sometimes required to carry warning slates. Small chalkboards hung around their necks listing behavioral infractions. A literal scarlet letter. You'd think we've evolved beyond public shame. But have you seen Twitter? Logan vanished for a long time. No credit history, no employment record, no known address. Just a void. Until one night, 10 years later, his girlfriend showed up at a police station outside Eugene. She had a story, a voice memo on her phone, and a name that hadn't been spoken aloud in a very long time: Madison Cole. But that's next. For now, you sit with the weight of the unspoken, the student who didn't graduate, the warning signs ignored, and a teacher who believed too much in redemption to protect herself from reality. You wait in the cold archives of the Salem Police Department. Somewhere down the hall, a vending machine hums louder than it should. The fluorescent lights overhead flicker in that way they do in government buildings, half asleep, half apologizing. You're sitting across from Detective Harvey Malloy, now retired, older, slower, but still sharp in the eyes. He pulls a thin folder from the dusty stack labeled Cold Cases, 2007, and sets it in front of you with a sigh. "This one never left me," he mutters. "We had air, but no fire." And that's exactly what it was. 10 years of nothing. No body, no credible leads, no new evidence, just silence, suspicion, and stories that slowly turned into local legend. Some people thought she ran away. Some thought she had a breakdown. One caller said she was abducted by aliens. Another said she'd been seen waitressing in Nebraska. Malloy followed everyone because he never believed she left by choice. "We had one glove," he says, "but no prints. Her DNA, yes, and some ghost. A male profile, unmatched." They ran it in 2008, again in 2010, a third time in 2013, nothing. It became a kind of running joke in the lab. But everything changed in 2017. A woman named Tessa Langley walked into a precinct south of Eugene, holding a phone with shaky hands. She was nervous, sweaty, had to be asked twice to sit down. She said, "My boyfriend talks in his sleep." That's how it started. She told officers she'd been dating a man named Logan Price for 2 years, said he had a temper, but never laid hands on her. Said he kept everything private, never posted photos, didn't use banks, didn't tell stories about high school, but a few nights before, he'd woken up in a sweat, whispering something. I didn't mean to kill her. She thought it was a dream, until he repeated it the next night, clearer, louder, with a name attached. Madison. I'm sorry. That's when she Googled it. Madison Cole, Salem, 2007, missing. She read the entire case thread on Reddit, scanned every forum post, found a cached article about a student named Logan P. who had transferred out before graduating. She recognized the photo immediately. She told the cops everything, and then she played the recording. Because, see, she'd started using a sleep app, the kind that records nighttime movement and snoring patterns. It had a feature that captured audio during spikes in volume, like talking or confessing. And there it was, on a grainy MP3, Logan Price's voice. She saw my face. I had the glove. I panicked. I didn't mean to. I just pushed. The room goes silent. Malloy leans forward. We listened to that file 30 times. Didn't want to believe it, but it was him. Same cadence, same vocal patterns. The glove made sense now. The lack of struggle, the missing keys. But there was still a problem. Logan Price didn't legally exist anymore. He changed his name in 2010, using forged documents traced back to an online identity ring. Took on a new name. Moved south, got a job fixing HVAC units, paid in cash, no social, no fingerprints in the system. Until that voice recording. And suddenly, the cold case had heat again. The police tracked him down just outside Medford. He was renting a trailer behind someone's barn. Said he was saving for a trip to Alaska. Said he liked the quiet. They knocked. He opened the door, and he knew. You could see it in his face. He didn't run, didn't fight, just blinked slowly and said, "I knew this day would come." Here's your historical fact of the night. In ancient Assyria, sleep talkers were believed to be possessed by spirits trying to communicate with the living. Entire dream-interpreting guilds existed just to decode whispered words at night. Historians still debate whether this was religion, psychology, or just early evidence of trauma. In Logan's case, it was guilt. He confessed. Mostly, said it started as a plan to rob her. Thought she'd be out for the night. Brought gloves. Waited by the back fence. But she surprised him. Opened the sliding door. Saw his face. Recognized him. He panicked. Pushed her. She fell. Hit her head on the concrete step. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, he said. But that's where the story got fuzzy. He claimed he wrapped her in a tarp and buried her somewhere up in the hills. But despite multiple searches, no remains were ever found. The spot he marked led to nothing. Maybe he lied. Maybe he forgot. Maybe the earth had already taken her back. They charged him with involuntary manslaughter. No body, no murder charge. But the court heard the tape. The jury didn't need a grave. He was convicted in 2018. Tessa moved away, changed her number. She never spoke to reporters, said she just wanted to be done with nightmares. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some modern smart home devices have been subpoenaed in court for their accidental audio recordings. The age of sleep-talking justice. It's here, and apparently admissible. So after 10 years, the case was closed. Sort of. Because even with a confession, even with a conviction, Madison was still gone. No remains, no grave, no final goodbye, and the town, it quietly returned to pretending it hadn't known all along. The case went cold for a decade, but it never got quiet. You walk into the courtroom. Not in real life, this is more of a mental revisit. A slow-motion replay of the moment when truth stood in the fluorescent light and tried to hold its shape. It's 2018. The state versus Logan Price. The courtroom is full, but tense. Quiet, like everyone's holding their breath out of respect or disbelief. Logan looks smaller than you imagined. Not dangerous, not deranged. Just blank, like a copier left running after hours. The DA walks through the timeline. Madison's disappearance, the glove, the cold case. The sleep recording, Tessa's testimony, the makeshift confession, all laid out like puzzle pieces that almost fit, but still no body. The defense tries to argue that sleep talk isn't a confession, that dreams aren't proof, that Logan had a troubled childhood. Sure, but no history of violence. They say there's no direct evidence of harm. They say we don't even know she's dead. They say he was just a scared teenager. But here's the thing about scared teenagers. They don't dig graves. Tessa takes the stand. She's nervous, pale. Her voice shakes as she plays the recording again. It's scratchy, faint, but chilling. The words don't change. The courtroom doesn't breathe. The moment just stretches like time itself wants to look away. The jury listens, some with their eyes closed. One woman covers her mouth. Another looks straight at Logan like she's trying to read what's left of his soul. Then they deliberate. Less than 6 hours later, they return. Guilty, involuntary manslaughter, tampering with evidence, improper disposal of remains. The sentence, 20 years. Not life, not murder. Because without a body, the system only lets you call it an accident, even when you know it wasn't. Now, here's your historical fact for tonight. In 17th century England, a person couldn't be declared legally dead without a body unless 7 full years had passed. This rule led to hundreds of cases where missing persons were technically still alive, even decades after vanishing. Some spouses remarried illegally. Some insurance claims were never paid. Historians still argue whether this was a cautious form of justice or just a clerical nightmare. In Madison's case, her legal status shifted the moment Logan confessed. But the emotional truth, that was harder. Her sister sat through every day of the trial, quiet, sharp-eyed. When the verdict was read, she didn't cry, just exhaled. The kind of breath that tastes like 10 years of waiting. She said afterward, "I'm glad there's a name, but there's still no goodbye, because that's the wound that doesn't close. The absence of a funeral, the empty chair at Thanksgiving, the box of lesson plans she never got to teach. There's no closure when your loved one just stops existing without a trace." And the town tried to mourn. But it's hard to grieve someone when you spent a decade pretending they might still show up. Like maybe she just changed her mind, or moved, or got tired of being known. Eastwood High held a memorial assembly. A plaque was mounted outside her classroom, in memory of Miss Cole, teacher, mentor, friend. Some of her students came back just to see it. Others didn't want to, said it felt too raw, too wrong. Like the kind of thing that belongs in someone else's story, not theirs. You walk those school halls now. Lockers hum with old stories. Desks still bear the scratches of bored hands. And her classroom, it's frozen. Administrators kept it closed for months. Couldn't decide what to do. Eventually, a new teacher moved in, a young woman named Grace, fresh out of grad school. She kept most of Madison's layout, said it just felt right. But even she admits, sometimes I hear the heater kick on and expect to hear her voice, like she's about to start a lecture from behind the board. There's something about spaces like that. They remember. Here's your quirky tidbit. In Japan, some school buildings are said to be haunted not by ghosts, but by memories themselves. The Japanese term mono no aware describes the ache of impermanence, the way objects absorb emotion over time. That's what Madison's classroom feels like. Not haunted, just aware. And the town, well, it adjusted. That's what towns do. They repaint the playground, rename the newsletter, elect new school board members. They smile at bake sales and put the past on a shelf, high up and just out of reach. But some of them remember the cashier at the store where Madison bought her wine, the gas station clerk who saw her flinch, the neighbor who didn't look out the window when the dog started barking. They remember, and every time they drive past her house, that perfect little craftsman with the porch light that still works, they feel it. That pinch, that phantom ache, that question that never got answered. Where is she? Not just legally, not just spiritually, physically. Because Logan never gave a location that made sense. Because the glove never led to a grave. Because the woods are wide and the hills are deep. And sometimes the earth keeps its secrets with the kind of devotion that borders on cruelty. Madison Cole disappeared, and then she was taken, and then she was spoken of only in past tense. But that doesn't mean she's gone. It just means the town stopped saying her name out loud. You sit in the interrogation room now, not in real time, but as if the walls themselves have memory-tinted glass, thick table, the hum of recycled air, the kind of space that absorbs guilt, then echoes it. Logan Price sits across from you. He doesn't look like a killer. That's what people always say. He looks like a guy who might fix your car or work in the back of a grocery store. Average height, soft voice, the kind of face that becomes invisible at stoplights. But there's a crack in him, a quiet one. Detective Malloy plays the audio file again, just loud enough to fill the room. She saw my face. I had the glove. I panicked. Logan stares at the table. His fingers twitch slightly, like he's trying to erase something he can't stop seeing. Then, for the first time in over a decade, he speaks her name aloud. In Madison Cole. He says it like he's apologizing to the floor. The confession isn't smooth. It's messy, incomplete. He shifts blame, pauses often, changes his wording like a man editing his own obituary. But the truth trickles out. He'd followed her before, twice. Once at the grocery store, just to see if she'd notice. She didn't. Another time in the school parking lot, long after he'd dropped out. That time, she did see him. She locked her car faster than usual. Didn't wave. She knew, he says. I think she always knew it wasn't about money. Not really. He talks about resentment, about feeling judged, about how she saw through him. How she never let him slack like other teachers did. She acted like she cared, he says, almost like an accusation. That's what messed me up the most. It was supposed to be simple. In and out. Take something. Prove a point. But she surprised him. Opened the sliding door before he was ready. No mask. No lies. Just him, standing in her yard like a living scar. He says he wore the glove out of instinct. No plan. Just fear. He thought she'd scream. She didn't. She said my name, he whispers, soft, like she was disappointed. That's when he pushed her. Didn't mean to, he says. Didn't check for a pulse. Just saw blood. Panic. Got the tarp from her shed. Used her car, then abandoned it 2 blocks away and walked back for his own. And the rest, I don't remember where I put her. You don't buy that. Neither did the detectives. But he insists, every time. Now, here's your historical fact of the night. In ancient Egypt, confessions were not about truth, but balance. The weighing of the heart ceremony was the ultimate test. Speak lies. Your heart was fed to Amit, the devourer. Speak truth. You passed into peace. Historians still debate whether these rituals were literal, metaphorical, or judicial theater. Logan's confession feels like theater. 2. A performance of guilt. A script written in delay. He says he's sorry. He says he didn't mean to kill her. But then, why the years of silence? Why the vanishing act? Why the glove? The answers don't come. Not really. Because the truth is, some people are shadows long before they do anything monstrous. Here's your quirky tidbit. In the 1990s, the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit coined the term organized disorganized for criminals like Logan. Those whose crimes reflect planning, but whose lives don't. No prior records, no clear triggers, just isolation, obsession, and timing. Logan says he kept the glove in his pocket for weeks after, as a reminder, as a curse, and when asked why he left it in her yard, he shrugs. Maybe I wanted her to be found, but she wasn't. And here's the part that sticks with you. He never once asks what happened to Benny, Madison's dog. The only witness, the only creature who might have barked or followed or bitten or tried. He doesn't ask, because deep down, he already knows. He left the door open behind him. Because he knew that when they found Benny scared, loyal, alone, they'd look for her. And that's the cruelty of it. He wanted to be seen, remembered, but only as the mystery, not the monster. So he wrote the first half of a story and let the rest rot in the soil. And the interrogation ends not with a scream, or a tearful apology, or even a definitive map. It ends with silence. The same silence that crept across Madison's porch, that wrapped itself around her classroom, that echoed in her sister's phone calls, unanswered. A silence that finally has a voice, but not an ending. Not yet. You rewind one more time, but this time, you do it slowly, frame by frame. You've heard the confession. You've walked through the timeline. You've stood in the room where he admitted what he did. But something still doesn't sit right, because the story Logan told, it doesn't line up. Not with the evidence, not with the silence, not with Madison. He said he pushed her, panicked, fled. But the scene in her house didn't reflect panic. There was no chaos, no overturned furniture, no torn clothing, no sign of a struggle. It was calm, too calm. That means one of two things. Either he lied or he stayed. The glove being found outside, that wasn't accidental. The back door left open, that was intentional. The tea kettle warm but untouched. That's a pause, a moment in time that says, I waited. So now, you entertain the other version. The one Madison never got to tell. She lets him in. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's instinct. Maybe she sees him on the other side of the glass and thinks, he's still just a kid, one of mine. So she opens the door. She doesn't scream. She doesn't run. She asks what he's doing here. And Logan, with the glove already on, makes a choice. Not a mistake. Not a stumble. A choice. You walk through it slowly. The way he described things, the way he emphasized her eyes, the way he said she looked disappointed, that's the kind of detail you remember when someone holds your gaze too long. And then you reach the part that really doesn't fit. He said he buried her, but the search teams never found disturbed soil. Dogs never hit on a single location. Not in the hills, not near the highway, not even close. And then there's the car. Madison's car was still in her garage, but Logan claimed he moved it and walked back, which would require time, risk, a second vehicle. The investigators tore that claim apart. What they believe now and what no one said aloud in court is this. He never used her car. He used his own, and he didn't bury her. He placed her somewhere she wouldn't be found. A body of water, maybe a ravine, an abandoned drainage culvert, something that eats time and silence both. Here's your historical fact for tonight. In ancient Rome, bodies of dishonored individuals were sometimes thrown into the Tiber River as a symbol of erasure. It wasn't just disposal, it was deletion. Historians still debate whether this practice was legal punishment or a way to erase political threats from memory. Logan may not have known that, but he understood the psychology. No body, no murder, no location, no closure. He wanted the power of guilt without the permanence of consequence. You step now into the forensics room. You revisit the glove, the DNA. What they didn't reveal to the press was that the male DNA inside the glove was partially degraded, suggesting it had been worn before, not fresh from the box, not new. Logan had worn it earlier, maybe during surveillance, maybe while casing the neighborhood, maybe while rehearsing in his head what it would be like to knock on her door. It's not a robbery gone wrong, it's a reckoning. A student who hated being seen and who couldn't forget the one person who saw him clearly. You remember what he wrote in that notebook? It's not about getting even. It's about being remembered. But being remembered comes with a cost. Because here's your quirky tidbit of the night. In the 1800s, American grave robbers were sometimes hired by medical schools to provide cadavers for dissection. They called themselves resurrectionists, and sometimes they buried empty coffins filled with rocks to fake a burial. Madison never got a burial, not even an empty box. And that, more than the crime, more than the confession, is what haunts you most. Because she wasn't just taken, she was erased, and that feels personal. So you sit with that. You let it crawl under your skin. The idea that a woman who built her life around remembering the past could be so completely removed from it. And for what? A boy's rage, a town's indifference, a decade of silence that pretended it was peace. Logan is in prison now, serving 20 years for something the jury couldn't quite name. But justice, that's still up for debate. Because Logan told a story, but the truth was quieter. The truth didn't flinch. The truth didn't leave a mark. It just stood at the back door and never came home. You walk through the town again, not the one you see in photos, not the version they show on the Chamber of Commerce website with the Autumn Festival, the Saturday Farmers Market, the cheerful little sandwich shop on Main. No, this is the real town. The one underneath, the Salem that flinched when Madison Cole disappeared, then smiled politely and moved on. The Salem that said she was too good to stay here anyway. The Salem that whispered, at least it wasn't one of ours. As if she wasn't. You stop at the coffee shop where she used to grade papers. The barista remembers her vaguely, says she always tipped in coins, laughed at her own terrible puns, brought a reusable mug with a faded sticker that read, "Hindsight is literally 2020. But when you ask what people said after she vanished, the barista shrugs. We thought she moved. Everyone does eventually. That's the lie towns like this are built on. the illusion of motion, of things changing just enough to forget what didn't. You walk past the school, past the homes, past the gas station, past the corner where that glove was found, now paved over by years of polite forgetting. And you start to realize something. It wasn't just Logan who let this happen, it was everyone. The principal who dismissed the early warning signs, the counselor who never followed up on Madison's written concern, the school board member who lobbied for quiet handling of difficult students to protect funding, the neighbors who heard a dog bark and turned up the TV, the students who joked that Madison was too perfect and didn't mean it, the PTA mom who called her intimidating and never showed up to conferences, the system that thought kindness was the same as weakness and decided she could handle herself. But Madison wasn't weak, she was vulnerable. Because she believed in the very place that failed her, and that's the wound that still stings. The betrayal not of one man, but of an entire machine built to look stable while it quietly rusted through. Here's your historical fact for the night. In the 1950s, American suburban planning intentionally favored uniformity houses the same size, same shape, same placement to reduce perceived crime. But sociologists now argue this sameness made people less likely to intervene during emergencies, assuming someone else already had. That's what happened here. Everyone thought someone else would act, that the bark wasn't urgent, that the door wasn't ajar, that the woman with the quiet strength would never need protecting. And so they waited and watched and failed. Now here's your quirky tidbit. There's a psychological term called diffusion of responsibility. It's why people don't help during emergencies in crowds. The more witnesses there are, the less likely it is that any one person will step in. This town had hundreds of eyes and no hands, so what now? Well, the memorial still stands. The plaque outside room 104 is polished monthly. There's even a scholarship in her name, small, quiet, offered to a senior planning to major in history. They mean well, but what she needed wasn't remembrance, it was prevention. And that didn't come, not when it mattered. There's something heartbreaking about walking through a place that failed someone and realizing how many people still live like it didn't. The grocery store still plays the same radio station. The coffee shop still makes the same pastries. Kids still trick or treat on the same sidewalks where the glove once lay half buried. And no one says her name out loud unless prompted. It's not that they forgot, it's that remembering hurts. And guilt has a way of hardening into narrative. It was just one bad kid. Nobody could have known she shouldn't have opened the door. But guilt, like trauma, has roots, and this town is full of soil. So you dig deeper, and the more you look, the more you see it. Not just the town that looked away, but the one that kept looking away and still does. You slip inside the classroom, room 104. The door doesn't creak, not anymore. It was replaced after the building was renovated in 2020. But it still feels like a place that holds its breath. You step over the threshold. Same whiteboard, same old corkboard on the back wall, now updated with posters about voting rights and climate change. Same windows, looking out on the parking lot. But the desks are new, sleeker, less scratched, less real. Madison. Cole's name isn't written anywhere here, but she's still in the room. You feel it. In the lesson plan saved on the shared drive labeled Cole Ushist 04, in the way the current teacher, Miss Grace Vinton, speaks in even, measured sentences, as if channeling someone else's cadence. In the way students still leave notes in the back cabinet drawer, a drawer Madison never locked, because she believes some things should always be easy to open. You read a few. I'm sorry I bombed the test, but I'm trying. My parents are fighting again. I just needed to tell someone. Thank you for not making history boring. Those were never meant for Ms. Vinton. They're echoes, caught in a loop. Letters written to a ghost who still takes attendance in their hearts. Madison's old desk sits in the corner now, repurposed as a supply station. Tape dispensers, tissue box, a drawer full of expo markers. But open the bottom drawer, and you'll still find it. Her copy of A People's History of the United States. Pages dog-eared, margins filled with notes. A sticky tab pokes out near the Vietnam War chapter, marked simply, We carry wounds we pretend are maps. No one knows who left it there. No one dares remove it.
Missy.
Vinton says she sometimes dreams in chalk now. Wakes up thinking she's late to first period. Once, she walked into the room and found the board erased, even though she hadn't touched it since Friday. No one else had keys. She laughed when she told that story, but not all the way. Here's your historical fact for tonight. During World War II, London school children were often taught by substitute teachers inside subway tunnels. These makeshift classrooms were dark, cold, and terrifying, but teachers kept routines going anyway, believing stability could outlast fear. Historians still debate whether those lessons truly helped or just distracted from the trauma. Madison believed in structure, too. She believed that showing up even on the worst days was an act of defiance. And so, even now, her syllabus is still shared as a sample for new hires. Her quiz formats still used in training sessions. Her phrase, "History is what people forget on purpose," quoted every year at orientation. But it's not just the curriculum. It's the students. You talk to one, Isaac Rudd, now 27. He's a social worker, thin, tired, proud. He says Madison was the first adult who didn't laugh when he said he wanted to help people. She told me I'd be good at listening. He says, not just hearing, but really listening. You know, you do. He keeps a photo of her on his fridge, one of those field trip snapshots. She's laughing, hand over her mouth, sunglasses on. It's not posed, it's real. He says he almost dropped out sophomore year, but she kept calling, kept checking in, kept leaving blank flashcards on his desk with little notes like, "You're smarter than your silence. You talk to another." Maya Telford. She hated history, still does, but she says Madison taught her that hating something didn't mean you couldn't understand it. She told me anger is just knowledge with bruises. Maya says, I use that line all the time. Maya's a counselor now. There are more. Dozens. The girl who cried in the hallway, the boy who slept through class because his parents worked night shifts and no one else noticed, the kid who cheated once, confessed, and found grace instead of punishment. They all remember her, not as a saint, not as a martyr, but as a human being who showed up when she didn't have to. And here's your quirky tidbit. In 14th century France, monks kept memory jars sealed, clay vessels filled with rolled parchment prayers, hidden under floors. They believed the energy of the words would soak into the stone over time, that one day, long after they were gone, someone would feel them there. Madison's memory jar is this classroom. The desks, the books, the silence, the chair no one ever sits in, the cabinet drawer that still holds secrets and cheap pens and hope. And you realize this room remembers her better than the town ever did. It's not just haunted, it's loyal, just like Benny, just like Isaac, just like the truths we don't let fade. Even when the world politely tells us to, Madison Cole may have vanished, but her ghost, it teaches still. You stand beneath the streetlight one last time. It flickers, not for drama, not because it knows you're here, just because old wiring hums with age and neglect has its own rhythm. The wind moves gently down Maplewood Lane, brushing through the branches, rattling the last dry leaves on the sycamore tree outside Madison's old house. You're not sure why you came back. Maybe it's habit, maybe it's reverence, maybe it's that strange human compulsion to place ourselves in the same air that others once breathed, as if that might make them less gone. The house is occupied now. A young couple, dog in the yard. They changed the color of the shutters, painted over the porch rail. But if you look close enough, you can still see it, the shadow of a woman who left everything in place. A dog who barked too late, a town that blinked. Logan Price is serving his time. Quietly, no interviews, no visitors, no remorse that anyone can see. His name rarely comes up now except in those moments when someone whispers, "Wasn't he?" and then changes the subject. But the glove remains in evidence. Stored in a temperature-controlled box in the basement of the courthouse, it's been tested and retested, shown to juries, held up in documentaries, but it's still just a glove. A second skin that once wrapped around something monstrous and now just waits. And Madison, she waits, too, in some way, not for justice, that came late, and incomplete, not for remembrance. That arrived. Eventually, though filtered through tribute plaques and scholarship funds, she waits to be found. Because even though the law closed her file, Her family didn't, even though the news cycle moved on. The ache didn't, even though her name became a headline, then a whisper, then a factoid. It was never supposed to be this way. And you think about that, about how some people become myth not by what they did, but by what was done to them. How disappearance is the cruelest kind of immortality, because you're remembered not for who you were, but for how the world failed to keep you here. You walk one more loop through the neighborhood, you pass the school, the grocery store, the gas station, the lamppost that flickers, and finally, the lawn where the glove was found. You close your eyes, and you try to imagine what it felt like for her in that last moment. Not in fear, but in knowing, in understanding that someone she once tried to help had crossed a line so final, so sharp, that everything before it became irrelevant. She wasn't afraid. You believe that now. She was disappointed, and that, somehow, makes the loss even heavier. Here's your last historical fact. In ancient Chinese philosophy, there's a concept called yi, a moral sense of rightness that transcends punishment or law. A kind of internal compass that tells you not just what justice is, but what dignity demands. Madison lived with yi, taught with it, chose her students over safety, her town over ambition. And still, this was the ending she got, but not the one she deserved. Here's your final quirky tidbit. In certain Nordic cultures, there's a word skogsro for the ghost of a woman who disappears into the forest, never to return. She becomes part of the wind, the trees, the quiet. Locals say if you listen closely, you can hear her guiding lost travelers. Madison would have liked that, would have called it a folktale, then printed out a map of where the myth originated, would have turned it into a pop quiz about the oral history of Scandinavia and the role of grief in storytelling. Because even in loss, she was generous. Even in silence, she gave. Even in her final act unwitnessed, unspoken. She left a trail. You just have to choose to follow it. So now, you rest your hands in your lap. You close your eyes, just for a moment. Let the weight of the story settle, not to burden you, but to remind you. Remind you that some absences aren't empty. They're echoes. Madison Cole wasn't just a name in a file or a face on a missing poster. She was someone who showed up, who stayed, who believed in other people more than they believed in themselves. And when she vanished, it left a space shaped like her, but it didn't erase her. The town may have looked away, but her students didn't forget. Her classroom didn't forget, and maybe now you won't either. Let your breathing slow. Let the image fade. The porch light still glowing. The glove resting quietly beneath the leaves. The wind moving through Solemn like a voice just about to speak. You don't have to solve anything now. Just remember that being present is its own kind of justice. That showing up, listening. Really listening can keep someone visible, even long after they're gone. The story ends here, but the silence, that's up to you. So sink into your pillow now. Let the air in the room settle like dust in an untouched drawer. Let your thoughts drift like pages turned gently by a breeze. The world keeps spinning, but tonight, you don't have to. You're here, you're safe. And somewhere, out in the dark, quiet corners of memory, Madison Cole walks the halls of a school that still remembers the sound of her steps. Good night, traveler. Sleep easy. And if you dream, let it be of light.